I'm Dave Courvoisier. Thank you for joining us as we celebrate 65 years of covering Las Vegas. Now, the late 1950s was a groundbreaking time. Elvis's first new show at the New Frontier, the grand opening of the Tropicana, the Stardust, and the first signal from Lucky 13. That's us. I show you the early days of KTNV. 1956. The future king of rock and roll hits the stage in Las Vegas, one of many firsts that shaped Sin City.
We market ourselves as cowboys and Indians, howdy partners, the Old West. Well, that changed in the 50s and 60s.
Las Vegas, Nevada. From the air, Vegas, as they call it, looks like the small town it is. 35,000 permanent population. 7 million is the temporary population. 7 million tourists that annually pour in by bus and train and plane, and that leave $122 million gross.
The Sands Hotel, the Dunes Hotel, the Last Frontier became the New Frontier Hotel, the Sahara. So we dropped that cowboy and Indian marketing and image, and that's really when Channel 13 was born, as Las Vegas was moving into more of a modern perspective.
Lucky 13, KSHO-TV took to the airwaves on May 4th, 1956, broadcasting from our antenna on top of the brand new Fremont Hotel.
There's enough circulation in that man to start a shortage in the ink market.
In what man?
John Doe.
Now, again, 13 started in its first year or so as a movie station. It showed films. Sometimes the same film would be seen in the morning, in the afternoon, and evening, so the different working shifts would be able to see that film.
The station was started by a newspaper publisher, Morris Zenoff. He ran the Boulder City News and Henderson Home News in the late 1940s, but saw an opportunity in television.
He seemed like just a person that believed in Southern Nevada, the community of Las Vegas, in Henderson, and was a positive part of the community. He brought that positive energy. I don't care what you're doing. If you were going to start a television station in the early 1960s, you have to have a lot of energy and a lot of belief that you see the future.
Robert Stoddall started his career in television at Lucky 13 in 1964 as fill-in sportscaster and weather anchor. He says Zenoff sold the station shortly after he established it in 1956. And after that, it switched hands between a colorful group of owners.
I think it was purchased by business people, not broadcasters. And they simply saw it as an opportunity to sell advertising.
Zenoff sold KSHO-TV to Television Corporation of America for $200,000. And the station moved to the El Rancho Hotel, and in just 1 year, that company cashed out, leaving the station to 3 familiar Las Vegas names, Nathan Adelson, his son Mervyn, and Erwin Mulaski, for only $70,000.
The Mulaski family, they were primarily into real estate and building and development, and they saw this as an opportunity.
The Adelsons and Mulaski sold just 2 years later, and the finances took a deep dive. The station's new owners filed for bankruptcy in the early 60s, and on top of that, the FCC pulled KSHO's license. But in an effort to keep Lucky 13 on the air, the commission opened the door for another only-in-Vegas cast of characters to run the station, temporarily.
If you aren't a comic by the time you're 12, forget it.
Comedian Phyllis Diller applied to be one of them, but was denied. The new group of owners eventually moved KSHO into what used to be an old refrigeration warehouse on Valley View near Desert Inn. We never left that site, but changes kept coming, much like the town we cover.
The town is in a constant state of change and development. So you can always remember yesterday, and yesterday was something different in Las Vegas than it is today, and will be tomorrow. And that's part of the excitement of Las Vegas.
Dave Courvoisier, 13 Action News. Breaking barriers on and off the screen, coming up. how Bob Bailey changed Las Vegas television history.
Welcome back to the 13 Action News 65th Anniversary Special. I'm Kalina Estrinos. Dr. William H. Bailey was a civil rights activist, a loving father and husband. But he was perhaps best known as the MC at the historic Moulin Rouge and the host of the Bob Bailey Show, one of the first black-hosted television shows in the country. And it aired right here on Channel 13. Reporter Alicia Patillo takes a look back at how he changed Las Vegas TV.
Breaking barriers in the so-called Mississippi of the West. Bob Bailey got his start in Sin City in 1955 as the star singer for Count Basie at the Moulin Rouge, the first integrated hotel casino in the United States. His wife, Anna, was one of the casino's legendary dancers.
You know, went down to Fremont Street and places that we're the girls from the Rouge. You know, I guess it's the way we walked, the way we carried ourselves.
Then they saw the oasis in the desert, and that was the Moulin Rouge. So they explained it as it was just so beautiful.
Kim Bailey is Bob and Anna's daughter. She says after the Moulin Rouge shut down just 6 months after opening, her father saw an opportunity to take his talents and his message to television.
It's time for the Bob Bailey Show, with views and interviews with people who are in the news and those special people who are in the public eye.
The show started on KLAS under owner Hank Greenspun. But in 1957, after the station went under new ownership, Bailey moved to Lucky 13 under our former call letters KSHO.
Today is a departure from our regular show that we have for you each Sunday. You are witnessing the opening of the new KTMV Happy Theater.
It was a variety show with music.
Johnny can come home. No.
And laughs from the likes of Red Fox.
I see I'm not going to get serious on this show today.
The show also delved into the black experience in Las Vegas with figures like Sammy Davis Jr.
We were talking about how things used to be here in Las Vegas for the entertainer. Say back in...
Just got a pain.
Yeah, I know. Back in... when is the first time you played here, Sammy?
1944.
1944.
1944. And you couldn't, in those days, Bob, you could not, you had to enter into the club in the back door. I was at the old Rancho. You could not, they did not allow the performers, the black entertainers, to dress in the club.
Bailey's daughter, Kim, says she remembers being there to see her dad in action. He used to take her on set as a little girl, and she even made some memorable cameos on the show.
Sometimes he would put me in one of the shots right beside him. And I was only maybe 5 or 6, and I was chewing gum and pulling my gum out, and right in the camera lens.
Kim says her dad's legacy at Channel 13 is his sense of community and inclusivity.
I think he opened the door for that embrace between media, positive representation of all people, and because so often now you hear people say, oh, the media this, the media that, but it was very different here for us because it was fair. It's authentic and fair, and I think that Channel 13 is definitely a representation of that.
This has been yours truly, Bob Bailey, leaving you with one thought. You get as much out of life as you put in. God bless you all. Have a happy week, and ciao.
What a great story. Well, a growing city, the mob, and Saturday Night Fever. Up next, how Channel 13 covered the sizzling 70s.
Welcome back. I'm Trisha Keene. The 1970s were dynamite, but in Las Vegas, there was a different explosion happening. The population was growing fast, the mob was in control, and Saturday Night Fever was rocking the valley. And KTMVTV, formerly known as K-Show, was there to cover it all.
For the Vegas Valley, 13 belong.
It was a different town, much different town. It was a much smaller town back in the early 70s when I came to Las Vegas in 1971. TV was a very small medium. Radio was very big back in those days, and newspaper was the #1 source for information.
It was really an interesting time to be in the news business in Las Vegas, because keep in mind that the UNLV running Rebels were really at the height.
And run the man-to-man option. But if they're in the zone, you clap out with these guys flaring.
It was a glory period that they were really doing great things in collegiate basketball. There was a lot of really mob activity going on at that time. Lefty Rosenthal had his show at the Stardust, and he was a personality.
We were running the TV show, the Frank Rosenthal TV show. And of course, that was the show you see in the movie Casino, Frank Lefty Rosenthal, who was known as Ace in the movie, and of course, Tony Spilatro.
Spilatro, his brother John, business associate Herbie Blitzstein.
Those guys were all over Vegas. Every day you'd see a story in the news about Spilatro and Rosenthal, and Channel 13 was the place where the show actually ran.
So much was hidden from us. So much was hidden from all forms of the media in those days. I look back on what the wise guys got away with in the 70s and what was not reported on. It's scary. It really is. People were dying, there was skimming going on. There was lawlessness going on. And so the trick was actually to see what elected officials or what law enforcement officials were kind of cozying up to those mob influences. That was the trick and challenge.
KSHO at the time that I started there was an old barn that we all worked out of. And I remember Dick Clark walking into the studio.
You don't really want to know what's shaking here.
And he said this exactly, I'll never forget it. He said, you forget when you're in the entertainment capital of the world that the TV stations are number 126. So you leave like the stage of Caesar's Palace and you walk into KSHO and it's like it was a barn.
You almost feel like you were in the infancy stages of broadcast journalism, and I guess you were. The biggest hindrance that we found was the equipment, because it was the transition between film to tape. You had a camera in one hand, and then you had this huge big box that was on a cart that used to contain the videotape. So you'd have to lug that everywhere.
We had no internet. We had no beepers. We didn't have cell phones back in '73. So what we would do is we'd go out for the day. We'd leave a note for the sales secretary. This is where I'm going. I'll be here at 9, here at 10, here at 11. If the station needed to reach us, they would call us at one of those locations. And of course, lunch you left open-ended. Everybody headed to the bar at lunch. We just came out of the Madman days, in the early days of television. I mean, we were in the early 70s, and drinking was very much acceptable.
We'd go out in teams, and one guy would be the reporter, I'd be the photographer, then we'd switch, and we'd go and cover our stories that way. Discos were proliferating in those days. The Saturday Night Fever. So I would do that, and I would cover the amount of tourists and locals that were coming out, finding all this nightlife in Las Vegas. Trust me, it wasn't anything like it is today.
And I got hired over at Channel 13 because they wanted somebody to do a talk show. And back in those days, your license was predicated on how much community service you did. So everyone had to have a talk show back then. For financial reasons, it didn't pencil out. And so they just transitioned me into the news.
Now, you've often heard the little idiom that it's hot enough to fry an egg on the sidewalk outside. Well, it was pretty hot in Las Vegas today. So our resident weather person and chef, Marla Renee, is going to do just that. Marla, can you do it?
I don't know, Brian. I'm certainly going to try. We had the #1 newscast at 5:30 and at 11 because ABC was the #1 network.
TV was very small back in the early 70s. I mean, it was an afterthought for a lot of the advertisers. I mean, we were selling $7 commercials. So seriously, we were selling $7 commercials. I can remember the package. I could give them 50 spots for $350. Plus, we'd bring out the remote truck and we'd shoot the commercial. But stations were turning over because owners couldn't continue to sustain because they just didn't make money.
Arthur Williams owned Channel 13, Howard Hughes owned Channel 8, Johnny Carson owned Channel 5, and Don Ray owned Channel 3. And those properties were owned by those groups for many, 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 many years. And then all of a sudden, within, I think like 78, in 1978, within a 15-month time frame, Channel 3 sold for $3 million, Channel 5 sold for $5 million, Channel 8 sold for $8 million, and Channel 13 sold for $13 million. Channel 13 was the last one to go.
The Lucky 13 and the station was sold to the Milwaukee Journal Company, which owned it for several decades before selling to the EW Scripps Company in 2014. Well, coming up, honoring longtime anchorman Steve Shore, his legacy here at Channel 13 and in the Las Vegas community.
And welcome back to the 13 Action News 65th anniversary special. I'm Ty Quinones. Well, he was the anchorman so many locals grew up watching every single night on their TV. Steve Shore spent decades reporting Las Vegas news at multiple stations, but he started right here at Channel 13. And I show you how Shore changed KTNV and also the Las Vegas community that he so loved.
At News 13, Steve Shore is a community-minded journalist who can find the stories and bring them to you.
He did a mix of everything. He was, anything with the community, anything where he can get involved and get out there and meet people.
Steve Shore loved the Las Vegas community and the people he was able to help every single day. His son Darren says that his father and mother Holly moved the family out to Sin City in the early 1970s. A broadcaster already, Shore landed his first gig at Channel 13.
For all the stories of the day to be seen, come on along. This is where you belong. For experience, you can count on. It's News 13.
At KTNV, Shore reported on some of the biggest stories of the 80s, including the deadly fires at the MGM Grand in Hilton.
He was always in the middle of and always doing those big stories.
Shore also anchored at Channel 3 and Channel 8, but his true passion came when he left the anchor desk, serving the valley that became his home.
He always wanted to help people. He put everybody before himself. It's just, one of the ways that he was special.
After his time in news, Shore went on to become the vice president of government affairs for Prime Cable, which later became Cox Cable. He was also a key founder of Nevada Child Seekers, a nonprofit that helps families of missing children.
And he's always looking any way he can to better the community and keep this community moving forward, helping children in any way possible. Children are his passion.
Tonight, Joanne and dozens of families in need had the chance to celebrate the holiday at Chuck E. Cheese.
I'm just happy to be around children my age and be able to get out and play.
They ate, played, and received gifts. The event made possible through the help of a local nonprofit, sponsor moms, and sponsor dads.
When you watch their faces while they win the tickets and get prizes and will get presents later on, I think that tells the entire story.
Shore was also a big advocate of children's education. His son says one of the biggest honors of his father's life was when Clark County School District named an elementary school after him.
He was so proud of having that happen.
Shore's most recent role was Executive Vice President of Government Affairs at Fiero Communications. Darren says his dad will be remembered as a newsman, a family man, a child advocate, and a true community partner.
People you can count on News 13.
Yeah, a well-known name right here in the Valley. Steve Shore passed away in November of last year. Well, coming up, a growing city and also stories that made national headlines. We take a look back at the 1990s.
Out with the old and in with the new golden age of Las Vegas. In the 1990s, the Valley saw growth like it had never seen before, and stories that are still talked about to this day. As we celebrate 65 years, we take a look at how KTNV brought you inside Las Vegas.
It's such a news town. It's really a news town.
We had an increase in everything in the 1990s.
We were right in the golden age of Las Vegas.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
This is when the dunes imploded, is when the strip really started taking off.
All the casinos were now building there.
And when I moved here, the Luxor, like a quarter of the pyramid was built, or was being built. Treasure Island was being built, and the MGM Grand was being built.
There it is. History. Hey, there we are.
And so those three hotels, those were like going to be, you know, the big things happening on the strip.
Everywhere I turned, there was building construction everywhere I looked. And I drove down the strip and it was, you know, there were cranes and energy and lots of people.
People were coming there in droves. I mean, they were averaging sometimes, I think, 2,000 and 3,000 new residents a month at the time.
You had new development. You had neighborhoods that were popping up in the middle of nowhere. You had dirt lots that all of a sudden were becoming Summerlin. You had Green Valley being developed and planned. You had North Las Vegas starting at sprawl. You had 18 to 20 schools being built here every year and a half to 2 years. That was unheard of. It's still unheard of. You just don't do that. But they had to meet the demand of population moving in.
It was like the perfect economic storm.
And along with it comes a lot of problems.
So you have people coming here, rolling the dice, leaving everything they know to try and find, you know, their new home in the middle of the desert.
There's no place like home, especially Las Vegas.
So you have the challenges of road construction going on everywhere.
Back to the scene, marked with bullet casings.
You had crime on the increase, sadly. You had the more demands for all of the utilities.
Las Vegas utility rates are below the national average and rank in the middle among Western metropolitan areas.
It was a challenging time to be covering the news here because there was so much going on.
I worked at KTNV from May of 1990 until August of 1996. I was the evening news anchor, and then also I was the managing editor of the newsroom.
Good evening, I'm Ken Hamilton.
And I'm Kim Sherwood.
I started as the weekend anchor and weeknight reporter, and then producer as well on the show.
And we'll, of course, have results of the meeting tonight on News 13 at 11 o'clock.
And on the weekends, we had no assignment desk, and so I sat on the desk too. And I ran my own teleprompter. It was a different day. It was a different day in TV news.
You know, we brought in a lot of great talent. I mean, they brought in Kathy Ray. Kathy Ray worked against me, I should say, in Providence, Rhode Island.
Then my agent calls and he says, I have an interested station in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I said, I'm not interested in Las Vegas. Why? And they said, no. They said they really are interested in you. And do you remember John Daly?
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Daly.
And I'm Allison McCarthy.
Now, John had worked with me in Providence at the opposing station, but we knew each other. And so they said, you know, John is the co-anchor out there, and everything's growing, and you should think about it. So we figured, well, you know what? We've never been out to Vegas. I've never been west of Milwaukee. Let's go. They're gonna put us up at Caesar's Palace.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Daly.
And I'm Kathy Ray.
Brought in great people, like a woman by the name of Deborah Clayton.
I started as the 11 p.m. producer and wrapped up as the assignment editor.
So we were jammed into that newsroom. We were in a little sardine can, and it was an old building. And it didn't matter because we were all young, we were vibrant, we were energetic.
What we really thrived on was great live coverage. So when something happened, if something bad happened on the strip, or something that, an accident or a storm or something going on, we really made sure we were the best at it.
She joins us with the latest. Alyssa.
Kathy, we've just been told that police do have a man in custody.
I remember when Steve Wynn's daughter was kidnapped.
The former homecoming queen remains in seclusion with her family while police track down leads, and police say there are many leads to be tracked down. For instance, the speed at which the whole kidnapping, money exchange, and release happened seemed to surprise police.
I started in March, and then I think it was June when it was the whole O.J. Simpson thing. We started with that. To talk about jumping into a major story.
News from the O.J. Simpson murder case moved to Maryland today, where a lab conducted DNA testing on blood found at the murder scene.
And we would have, on every night we would have, our experts come in, and we followed it very closely.
I remember is the Rodney King riots. I finished the 6 o'clock newscast and I came off the set, and I where the feed monitor was for the national feed and the Los Angeles feed was right as I came off the set. So I just happened to look at it and see, and I'm seeing the rioting, all the rioting happening.
Of course, we had Tupac.
Tupac Shakur was sitting in the passenger side of this black BMW when someone opened fire. Shakur was shot at least 4 times. The driver, record executive Marion Knight, was grazed in the head.
And the interesting thing about Las Vegas was that almost every national story always had a local angle. And it was just a matter of time for us.
We were thoroughly engaged in trying to cover the news of the day and make sure that it represented, exactly what was going on, and gave the citizens of Las Vegas and Clark County the news that they needed to know, because this was such an unusual time for a city.
I think what people don't understand is when they see an anchor sitting up there, they think, oh, that person's doing it, that person wrote the story, that person, is totally, there's nobody else involved with anything. Well, we know that we're such a small part of a huge family behind the scenes, and we're just a tiny cog, but many talented people are working together. And that I couldn't do my job if I didn't have, talented producers, directors talking in my ears.
Well, it certainly is a wet night across the valley as the rain continues to really soak the desert.
Now I look at it and it's like, wow, I really got to, participate in the history of Las Vegas, and literally participate in it, because, a lot of things have changed as far as what TV personalities and employees are allowed to do. But we went to every single hotel opening. We went to every restaurant opening. We went to everything to experience it for the first time, which was an absolute blast.
We laughed in the newsroom a lot.
Honestly, I was just, to me, Channel 13 was a family, and still is a family.
The new millennium brought new growth and new challenges to the valley. Coming up, a look at how the 2000s changed Las Vegas. Stick with us.
And welcome back to the 13 Action News 65th anniversary special. I'm Trisha Keene. The new millennium brought a big boom, fears of a terrorist attack, some of the most memorable court cases in Las Vegas history, and ended with the recession. 13 Action News was there to cover the rise and fall of the 2000s.
Early 2000s to the mid 2000s felt like a real boom time. I got here, you had the sense the streets were paved with gold, and it was just the land of opportunity. It's like the gold rush, people moving west all over again.
It was still a town where everybody knew everybody, and it was still a town where you could put a call into, let's say, a Phil Ruffin or a Steve Wynn, and you would get a call back.
The town itself wasn't nearly as big as it is right now. The entire southwest part of the valley was just barren open desert.
Contact 13's Trisha Keene is here now with the latest on Wall Street's reopening. Not a good day on Wall Street.
No, not a good day at all. I started literally 7 days before September 11th.
As the search and rescue efforts continue at the World Trade Center site, the investigation into who's behind the attacks is moving forward. You're looking now at a live picture from New York City.
It was a really scary time during 9/11. Las Vegas was vacant on the Strip. I never thought I would see that. The casinos were open, they weren't shut down like pandemic, but there were no tourists coming here.
Occupancy at local hotels was down about 30%, according to the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority. Also, roughly a dozen conventions and meetings have canceled, the biggest one totaling 18,000 people.
The concern back then was that Las Vegas would be a target, and there was talk that they wanted to fly planes into the hotels at the time. And so we were a high alert city, and it was a very, very concerning time.
I started June 17th of 2003. So there was the Margaret Rutan trial.
Why would someone want to kill Ron?
I wish I could answer that. I wish I could.
There was the Sandy Murphy, Ted Binion murder trial that was happening. That lasted for quite a few weeks. I wasn't actually part of the Jessica Williams trial, but I do remember that day very vividly.
Dr. Mark Chambers used various charts and graphs to show that based on the schedule Williams kept as an exotic dancer, her body's sleep rhythms made her highly vulnerable to falling asleep at the exact time of day when the crash occurred.
I got the call, they knew where I was going. Hey, can you fly? There's 5 kids that were killed along I-15 up by the Speedway. At that point, you have to stop what you're doing and realize what the nature of the event is.
I started as the Contact 13 consumer advocate investigations and a backup anchor to our primary anchor.
Contact 13's Tricia Keene has the details.
HUD hopes the plan will take the cheating and confusion out of home mortgage settlements. We uncovered a lot of scams that were happening here in the Valley. When we would see consistent complaints come in through the hotlines, the viewers tipped us off to what was happening, and then we would go out and do those stories. I still have viewers to this day who reach out to me and thank me for things that I did 20 years ago, and they can't forget.
When I moved here, it was in 2004, and there was a housing boom. I mean, people were literally lining up to get a house here, and it was competitive.
All the home construction and everything was just going super strong. Of course, and this was just a year before we had the big real estate crash.
People were losing their homes. Homes were, getting foreclosed for, people who just couldn't stay in them anymore and didn't have the option of refinancing.
Across the board, businesses were cutting back, and we're not immune to that, and laying people off, and cut back significantly in 2008. So it was a scary time.
You had to just let go of your home. People were short selling.
And if you study the history of Las Vegas, whether it's things that cause a drop in tourism like 9/11, other stock market crashes and bubbles, that Las Vegas always seems to come back stronger.
True. And then the next decade brought some of the most challenging stories that we've ever covered. Coming up, the 1 October shooting and how it changed our newsroom.
And welcome back. In 65 years, we have certainly covered stories of all kinds, but the 2010s saw some of our most challenging, including, of course, the 1 October shooting. But we look back now at the stories that changed the city forever and what also we've learned from them.
This business is not for the faint of heart. It's not easy. It's a lot of work. A lot of times we have to cover stories that are hard to watch.
I vividly remember covering the Lakeisha Holloway situation on the Las Vegas Strip, because that was the first time we had ever heard of that many people down on the Strip. Dozens of people injured in that case, and there was a fatality.
Right in front of the Harris Casino on the Strip, a car just ran over a whole bunch of people, probably like 20 people.
The one thing that the Lakeisha Holloway case did, it changed the safety on the Las Vegas Strip for pedestrians. Now there's bollards that's been installed up and down the Las Vegas Strip, and it makes it safer to walk for the thousands and thousands of people who come to Las Vegas. 1 October is the most challenging story that has ever happened here.
Reports of gunfire down on the Strip. It's shutting down parts of the Strip near Mandalay Bay.
When I woke up, my phone was, alerts were going off.
It was unnerving as a human being.
Something big is going on, but I had no idea the magnitude of what had happened.
Who would have ever thought that somebody would bring all those weapons up to a room and open up a window and shoot down on people enjoying a concert?
That's the challenge as a journalist, is when you are unnerved and you are anxious and scared as a human being, you got to be able to find a way to pull yourself together and remember you have a job to do in this moment.
Good morning, Las
good
Vegas.
morning.
It's been quite a 24 hours, hasn't it?
Yeah, we're back here, partner, where we should be, where we need to be as we continue to kind of deal with what happened in our city. And we heard it last night during some of the vigils, the one pastor saying, you know, evil showed its face Sunday night, but love, you know, is showing its face now. And boy, oh boy, we need lots of love.
I remember just not really clearly knowing what had happened, and I walked down to the lobby of my building because I live in a high rise, and people were coming in, and there was someone that I saw, and he said, "Look, I'm okay, but it was horrible. I have video of what happened." And I said, "Video?" So he was showing me, you know, that he was kind of running away, and he was showing me this video where you could see people running, and I could hear the shots, and I went, "Oh my goodness, like this is huge."
And excess of 20 plus that have died. And the deaths associated with this event to be over 50. People that have died associated with this event has increased. Right now we're using the number of 58.
Every time Sheriff Lombardo would come out and give an update, yes, we got more information, but he unfortunately would also, the death toll would rise. And so it was like this strange moment of wanting more information, but realizing every time the sheriff was speaking, we were going to have to deliver some more terrible news. And that was probably the biggest challenge of my career.
Something that Channel 13 had in place was a breaking news desk, and it came into play in a big way during 1 October because we had an area where you could look up information as it was coming up, bring it on monitors. You could put two, you know, things next to each other. We could have a map, we could have some video, we could have a live reporter in there. And we also had a lot of the resources that we needed all bookmarked and ready on the computer system there.
To the families and friends of the victims, know that we'll do everything we can to help you and our city heal. We are Vegas strong.
Seeing how they embraced the community, how they honored the victims, inscribing their names under the ice, retiring the jersey, and the number of people that passed away, that said a lot about the heart of that team. And I think Las Vegas really responded to that and got behind the Knights. And so for that, they represent strength, they represent triumph over tragedy to me. And I think a lot of people here in Southern Nevada.
It's really hard to use the word, it was a proud moment, because I can't even say that word when I link that up to 1 October. But I know that our experience and what we do for a living helped this community get through it.
You remember the lines of people donating blood. That was first and foremost. People waiting 2-3 hours, and covering those stories and seeing those stories, I think, helped me as a human being, as a person.
2020 certainly was the year that changed everything, and TV news was no exception. The challenges of covering Las Vegas news right in the middle of the pandemic, and also the future of KTNV TV. That is up next.
Welcome back. I'm Dave Courvoisier. 2020, the year that changed everything, and the news business was no exception. However, our mission stayed the same: to give light to our viewers, to help them find their own way in these challenging times.
The health district announcing the first presumptive case of coronavirus here in Clark County.
We've had global pandemics before. We've heard of the swine flu, there's been other things, but nothing that has affected domestic America like this, and nothing that has really halted our lives.
I've spoken with the chief medical officers of all of Nevada's hospitals to get their assessment of our current situation and most responsible next steps. They have advised me that the most effective course of action is to direct all Nevadans to stay home and for non-essential businesses to close to the public for 30 days.
There was no playbook for us. We're an organization that we can't go off the air, right? Our newscast happened live.
Anchoring from home, it's, you know, in some ways we're lucky to do it because we're able to get on air.
We had to really pivot as an organization and find a way to get people out of the building, working remotely, invent all new processes.
So it was challenging, but I got a lot more confidence. I started as a one-man band in the business, and then I became a one-man band 30 years later, broadcasting from home.
With this pandemic, it is a slow-moving tragedy. When you think of where we stand now, 560,000 Americans are dead. You know, if that happened in a single incident, I think it would galvanize the country and the world around a singular focus and purpose, much like maybe after 1 October or after 9/11. But because this has been so slow moving, it has also opened the door for so many different viewpoints and misinformation to sort of creep in to the narrative.
And when I saw the images of the food lines, and then I was getting inundated with emails and Facebook messages, can you help, can you help? I was getting a lot of messages when the CARES Act passed and people were expecting money. I mean, when you shut down a strip and so much of our economy and the workers are in one area, thousands of people needed money and they needed it fast. You can't shut a state down without having a plan in place. And our plan was broken. I knew I had to get involved and step up and do whatever I could do.
We're outside the Grant Sawyer building, and I'm here tonight off the 5 o'clock show because I wanted to talk to the governor finally myself. We've been asking for months now to talk to the governor about the PUA situation, the unemployment insurance situation. I've received thousands and thousands of comments.
I had a man, oh, I don't want to cry. I was staying up till like 4 o'clock at night, but I had a man who said he was going to kill himself over this because he couldn't feed his daughter. And I'm a parent. So I knew this was desperate. I mean, these people were not joking. You wouldn't have believed the kind of emails I got. And if you're a caring, loving person, you know you have to do something to help these people. He got paid. He got a backlog, and I'm telling you, he was owed over $12,000. $12,000, and he emailed me and he said, "You saved my life."
It was challenging, and the big concern for me was people's health and safety, right? While we're trying to maintain a business, we're trying to do our mission, serving our audience, but first and foremost, we got to keep people safe.
I think our role now is the same as it always has been. It's to be a voice of integrity, a voice of honesty, and a voice of accountability in all forms and fashion. And I think if you hold true to that, no matter the tragedy, no matter the victories that we go through as a community, we'll be here. And that's our focus, and that's our whole purpose.
This has been our 13 Action News 65th Anniversary Special. Here's to another 65 years covering news in the community we love. And remember, you can get the latest news, weather, and traffic anytime on air, online at KTNV.com, and on your favorite streaming device. Thanks for watching.